So let's begin with session one. For session one, we have our chairs. Of course, there is Professor Menon. We also have Ms. Nerupama Y.Modwel. Ms. Nerupama is the Principal Director of Intangible Cultural Heritage Division at INTACH. She has successfully completed a number of research, documentation, and workshop projects on performing traditions, folklore, oral narratives, and histories, as well as extensive cultural mapping along the Ganga and Yamuna rivers. She has worked on museum projects involving content creation and design, and on a number of seminal publications in the field of intangible heritage, including documenting India's intangible cultural heritage and heritage conservation and communities. She has also produced diverse INTACH films. So I would like to invite Dr. Munjal to felicitate Nerupama ma'am. Ma'am, could you please come forward? Please give a big round of applause. Right, so we have 4 presentations in session 1. Each of you can come forward and present your presentations from here. And once we start the discussion session, then we can all sit forward for the discussion. So first we have Dr. Arun Menon. And before that, I would like to announce that each of the presentations will be given 10 minutes. Followed then, after all the 4 presentations are done, it will be followed by a question-answer session. And for the chairs, in each of your folders, you will find some paper review forms with the presenter's name and title added to it. So we would like the chairs to fill those forms. Right, Dr. Menon, please. If you could also briefly introduce yourself. Yeah.
Very good morning. I'm Arun Menon, Professor of Structural Engineering from IIT Madras. And in this first session, we have this difficult task of speaking after Professor A.G.K. Menon on a tough topic, at least in our opinion. So this paper, written by co-authors with me, Karpagam Balamurugan, who's here, and Karpagam will be speaking after I introduce this topic shortly. Shivangi Shukla, the other author. And this is titled Decoding Ayadhi Ganitham in Dravidian Temples Through Reverse Engineering. So that's how we've organized this talk. Introduction objectives. What is Ayadhi? Many of you may be aware of this concept. The methodology of Ayadhi calculation is something that my co-author will introduce. Couple of case applications, we wouldn't be able to go deep into them, and some concluding remarks of the work. So our temples, the temples across the country, have been meticulously conceived with attention to geometry, the materials chosen, the structural materials, the construction methods and aesthetics, with the primary aim of uplifting spirituality while promoting well-being, both physical and mental well-being. The architectural marvel is the tangible heritage, along with the immovable and the movable parts. The traditional knowledge system and the cultural practices constitute the intangible heritage. So this is the context in which we are working. And in Tamil Nadu, in the Dravidian temples, there's an extensive history and continuity of practices kept alive even today. New temples are being built, old temples are being renovated. And this inquiry actually is based on the experiences we've had with the holders of the traditional knowledge. So the primary objectives of this work was to decipher the intricate relationship between the physical components of the built form, the presiding deity of course, and the primary stakeholders who are the patron, the builder, the community, through adherence to the traditional knowledge system of Ayadhi Ganitham. We have adopted what we are calling reverse engineering, which is what is used quite a bit in this subject of structural restoration, to adopt reverse engineering to calculate the Ayadhi number in two ancient Dravidian temples, Sri Abhatsahayeshwara temple in Kumbakonam district and Sri Ekambaranathar temple in Kanchipuram, both in Tamil Nadu. Incidentally, a few minutes ago, an hour or so ago, this project, which was completed in 2023, after a 2-year period and a 1.5-year period of research, Sri Abhatsahayeshwara temple has just received the award of distinction in the Asia Pacific, UNESCO Asia Pacific Awards this year. To understand, thank you, to understand how examining the traditional practice of temple design and construction with specific focus on Ayadhi Ganitham can also inform the conservation process, especially in culturally significant sacred spaces. And finally, to document and preserve the intangible knowledge of temple building practices. I'll just give you a brief introduction to Ayadhi and then request Karpagam to take over. Ayadhi Ganitham, the calculation of the Ayadhi is a number, is a key design element from Vastu Shastra. It is used by traditional architects called Sthapatis in some parts of the country, Sompuras elsewhere, to guide planning and construction of temples. There are several equations, if you want, or formulae derived from astrological parameters and Earth's directional influences. These assist in determining one auspicious number. It comes down to identifying one auspicious number associated with the proposed temple structure, a number associated to the physical form. The number, the Ayadhi, is believed to ensure the temple's spirituality and durability. It is a basic unit of dimensioning a temple. It can be the plan layout, it can be the elevation, it will be the decorative features as well. It serves as a measurement for length, width, area, perimeter of the structure that is being designed, and the sizes of rooms and all elements calculated. The sizes of rooms and all elements inside the structure are calculated using the ratio and proportioning method. So this is what the Ayadhi is. I now leave the floor to my to the lead author, Karpagam. Thank you.
Good morning, all. Actually, Ayadhi calculation is performed during the initial phases of the constructions, that is, after the site selection and before the architectural design. The formula consists of, we have to assume an odd number and it is multiplied by a fraction. The numerator and denominator of the formula varies to varies. For example, after the calculation, the resulting remains holds a significant, holds the importance, and it predicts the future of the structure. The remainder to be checked for the compatible with the qualities. This is the procedure we have to follow it. For example, the Garbham formula, we have to assume a number and multiplied by the fraction 1/8. Here I am assuming a number 15 and then multiplying by 1/8. The remainder is 7. The qualities of the 7 is animal is elephant, and then God is where direction is north, and the outcome is prosperity. So the number 15 gives the good luck to the temple. There are four types of Ayadhi formula based on the number of formula are in the calculations called Panchavimsa Ayadhi. It means it has 25 formulae, and then Shodasa Ayadhi, it has 16, Dasa Ayadhi 10, Shada Ayadhi 6. Currently we are using Shada Ayadhi with 6 formulae only. Actually, in the traditional unit, in the traditional architecture, we have used two types of units called Manushya Pramana and Yavamana. These are Manushya Pramana is based on the dimensions of the human body, whereas Navamana is based on the sizes of the regional grains like barley, wheat, rice. And then the equivalent of one, actually, if we consider in traditional architecture, the basic unit is called as angulam. The length of the one angulam is equivalent to the length of the central part of our middle finger, or it's equivalent to the length of the 8 grains. The equivalent length of one angulum is 3.5 centimeter, or we can take it as 3/8 inches in modern units. The case studies we have taken is Sri Abhatsahayaswara temple in Kumbakonam, that is constructed it was believed to constructed in Chola period, Rajendra Chola, and later expanded by the Klothunga Chola and Vikrama Chola. The temple complexes, it has 2 precinct walls, the Mandapam and the Sri Durga shrine in the second precinct wall, and the Rajagopram got severely distressed. So before the conservations, it was necessary to do the Ayadhi calculation for this temple. Even though the temple was unnoticed for very long time, the morning and the evening pujas were regularly happened in the Shiva shrine. The next temple which we have taken for consideration is Yegambaranatha temple in Kanchipuram. It is actually initially it was a brick masonry and later rebuilt in stone masonry. And then actually this temple was later expanded and reconstructed and renovated in different periods by different donors. So the current recent Karpagam is, we don't know when it was built, but is from the ornate embellishments and the construction techniques, we can understand that it was not more than 200 years old, constructed by the Nattukuttai Nagarathari business community in Tamil Nadu. This temple also had structural distress due to foundation settlement. Actually, we have calculated the Ayadhi calculation has 2 steps. So for Tukkachi, we have calculated the 29, that is Tanjai Mulam, and then for Kanchi, we have calculated, for Kanchi, we were not able to calculate the Tanjai. The calculation was, how we calculated the calculation is by measuring the perimeter and then converting into traditional units, Angulam and the Mulam. So since the Tukkachi temple is located in the Tanjai, we were able to get the Ayadhi easily by 29. Whereas Kanchi, we were not able to get it because we don't have, since proper records were not able, it was not available. So we have tried, we have taken, we got 730 Angulam. So we tried to in order to avoid the confusion, we have taken 729, 731 and 3129. We did for all the we did Ayadhi calculation for all these numbers. We have used Shodasa Ayadhi. It is a 16 with 16 formulae. From the Ayadhi calculations, this is the result we got for the Tukkachi temple. Most of the outcomes are positive and favorable. According to that Ayadhi calculation, the age of the structure is 83 years old. It means the temple is having long life, but the nakshatra is Visakha, which is not favorable for the construction activities. So this is the result which we got for the Tukkachi. For Kanchi, the reverse mensuring method is not able to work. We were not able to get the Ayadhi number directly, so we have analyzed the outcomes of all the Ayadhi calculations. From the analysis of the outcomes of the Ayadhi calculations, we found that even though most of the results are favorable and same, the 31 Madurai Mulam and 731 are having the age of the structure is 37 years old. But this temple exists from the Pallava period. So so these Ayadhi numbers will not be applicable by elimination method. So we rejected these 31 and 731, and then we checked for 29 and 729. If we see the nakshatra of the 29 and 729, 729 has the favorable nakshatra for the construction activities. So we came to the conclusion that 729 could be the Ayadhi for the Kanchi temple. But since we are not experts in these fields and lack of information, and due to interpreting the traditional books, we got the doubt that 729 we got the doubt whether 729 could be the Ayadhi for this temple or not. So this can be revisited by the experts, and there is a high scope for the further research. So the units which we have used are based on the regional grain size. The Ayadhi family has considered the directions, planetary motions, constellations, thus which interconnects the nature, the temple, and its cultural and astrological attributes. It is notable that the Ayadhi calculation is a methodical and quantitative approach to the entire process. It has conscious effort to establish a link between the human-made creation, the creator, and the beneficiary. The case studies offer a practical knowledge on Ayadhi calculation, revealing relevance in temple preservation and construction. The paper processes a holistic approach to temple conservation, emphasizing that intervention should restore physical features and revitalize the intangible in living heritage. It emphasizes also the need for dialogue between the traditional custodians of knowledge systems, modern architects, engineers, and conservationists, so that the sacred space remains vibrant centers of worship, community life, and continuity. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be taking the questions after all presentations. So the next is Dr. Shahul Ameen and Nihal A. Sir.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Shahul, and I'm a faculty at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Center for Gender and Livelihood. I'm part of it, and this is an ongoing work we are doing as part of a project. I'm working with one of my former student, Nihal, and this is an attempt to document the Dhow-Building landscape, knowledge, and livelihood of the Khalasis of Beypore. So, as you know, this Indian Ocean is a very remarkable place in terms of the circulation of knowledge, techniques, and building knowledge, etc. And in this course, you could see, for example, Calicut, Beypore, Karachi, Mumbai, and part of Goa. There are interesting practices of the boat building, traditional boat building. Because of many interesting reasons, it's part of the maritime Silk Route, and this also created kind of a cosmopolitanism in the culture of these places in terms of people, culture, their identities, etc. And especially Beypore is an interesting case in point, where the Dhow-Building, it's called Uru in regional language, that culture is emerged because of the very interesting favorable condition. You could see that river of Chalia, which actually comes from Western Ghats, and the teak wood, plenty of teak wood available in this, and comes through the river and to the river mouth. And lot many of these shipbuilding yards, boat building yards, Uru building yards, actually located in this position. So this study is a explorative study. You must be knowing in anthropology, we tabulus rasa, we won't go with any assumption. We go to the field and understand what is the value. We call it empathetic understanding of people's meaning making process. In that, it's that kind of a study. We went to this place and understand what is the value, what are the kinds of values this place has, etc., and what is worth of preserving in that, and what are the kind of practices are going on indigenous manner to preserve those cultures. So our research objectives were broadly, we want to understand socio-cultural economic landscape of Uru making, transcend the land oceanic boundaries. It's interesting. You will understand that referring to Professor Menon mentioned, we always have a tendency to understand heritage within the very geography of the country, right? And the oceanic heritage is actually transcend all the national imaginations, the boundary of national imagination. And Uru making, for example, I interviewed people in Mandvi. There are families of these Uru makers settled in the different coast of the Persian Gulf, right? So it's a transcending kind of a culture. And the livelihood concern, now no one will go for this Uru and all. So what is that, and what are the kind of safeguarding measures, especially it's important the craftsmanship is happening in this landscape. So this is the broadly 3 objectives we worked around, and mostly the fieldwork we conducted in Beypore, that river mouth. It used explorative research using participant observation, a prolonged engagement with communities in this space, qualitative methods we used, and we interviewed different kind of primary and secondary stakeholders, artisans, shipyard owners, resource persons, port officers, academicians who works in the maritime works, and purposive and snowboard sampling we use, and we often engage with something called narrative analysis and discourse analysis in order to understand what is the meaning making process is happening with specific to Uru in this area. So the first finding of this study, I use this notion of heritage assemblage broadly here. See, we found that there are interesting stakeholders. For example, Zamorins, the kings, is the one who facilitated this in historically, and you could see that the traders are important components. Khalasis, the mostly who build the ships, and Mukwen, fishing communities, Asharis, the carpentry, and the Collins, blacksmiths. And it's a very, in paper we are trying to see how this all interconnected in a discursive manner, rather than often you say, you know that qualitative research, we understand that discursiveness of it in that manner, and its economy, the culture. For example, very interesting to see, there is a very interesting notion now coming on the study of Indian Ocean. It's called Monsoon Islam. So it's a trade, how trade has created a particular cultural landscape where religion also an important component in this. So one critical point in this, you will understand that as later, now the Indian Ocean studies and all people are bringing out, you could see novel of Amitabh Ghosh, for example. So there is much happening on the sea, right? Not, we always have talking about the land, right? I think the imagination of our nation or imagination of heritage, we should actually transcend beyond the boundaries of, beyond the land, and that's the point, is recurrently coming from their narratives. Basically all the stories about the children, about their masters, everything, you could see that they are not settled in this particular landscape. So mostly they are referring to Abu Dhabi, they mostly refer to Dubai, Madagascar, for example. So that is the one interesting point is coming out in our narratives analysis. Second, interestingly, this about in this landscape about the intangible element of craftsmanship. So borrowing the theories of intangible cultural heritage, you will understand that which is not static, which is evolving over a period of time. You could see, for example, earlier they used to make tide by using cotton and kaya kind of ship making. Now over the period of time, you can see the second photograph, nail they used, and then now the iron nail using, and then choosing the wood, the timber kind of, for example, to make the base of a ship, there's a particular teak wood and it should be certain age, and the upper part of it, the superstructure part of it, they may use different kinds of the wood, and interestingly, this all orally transmitted, nothing recorded because for example, I was saying apprenticeship, like many of our intangible cultural heritage, you could see that you can learn by being part of it, not by things. So one part of it we are trying to understand the how all predicaments of documenting this, how you will do that, right? So often whenever we document, it become more kind of a sanitized, stabilized kind of a document. We are thinking beyond that and how one could do that. So this craftsmanship is the one thing is emerging in these discussions. The third theme is emerging narratives is the whole history connected with the decline of, because it was the one of, as you know, is the one of the flourishing industry because of the availability of the superior teak wood and all. Now it's declining in this area because of the different kinds of factors influence it. One interesting thing I want to we want to engage. Basically, many of this craft, especially timber-based craft in our country, struggling because of the conservation laws. The conservation laws. So, and funny part of it, what you conserve in forests, you conserve teak wood. Teak wood comes as part of the colonial plantation. You are not conserving actual forest. You are conserving the teak wood, which is planted as this kind of interesting connotation is coming up in this thing. And basically, the all discourse about conservation is actually being challenged, interrogated in this context. So this is the last slip, and now there are some attempt trying to take this shipbuilding into part of the globalized market, especially, for example, it's the last Qatar World Cup. You could see this miniature souvenirs of the ship is being given, and one person actually is now selling and building the ships for boats for the Qatar, because Qatar people see it's a part of their parental heritage, not of the heritage of Beypore, right? Because their parents used to get this historical time, the boats from Beypore. Now they see their interest, their heritage kind of things, right? So I think I just caught and the magic documents of intangible cultural heritage. Intangible to be kept alive, it must remain relevant to culture and the regulatory practice by learned within the communities and between generations. Now, this kind of, one could say, for the middle class, for the tourist purpose, mostly, this, I don't know how much can have a value of the culture and communities associated with that. I think preservation thinking also have to consider this kind of gentrifications, which is widely happening in this spectrum. Thank you very much for this.
Next we have Dr. Ananya Bhattacharya and Dr. Madhura Dutta.
Good morning. My name is Madhura Dutta. My co-author is Ananya Bhattacharya. She's not here today, so I'm presenting on both our behalf. I have been working in the sector of culture and development for more than 20 years. So that's my background. So the paper that I am presenting today is on bridging tangible and intangible heritage, empowering communities for holistic cultural preservation. This particular topic is set in a case study of the organization Contact Base, which has a flagship program called Art for Life, which I will explain to come to how we have looked at the case study. So the first framework that I would like to refer to, which we have referred to in our paper also, are the two main conventions that we look at when we look at cultural heritage. And here, the two relevant ones are the 1972 World Heritage Site Convention and the 2003 ICH Convention, because both consider community as a very important entity in the conservation process. Whereas the World Heritage Site Convention looks at linking living traditions and contexts, and also participation of community through the process of conservation and management. The 2003 convention puts community at the center of the whole conservation process, because without the main tradition bearers, who are the communities, an intangible cultural heritage cannot sustain and survive. So without the community, it is not possible. The other framework that we have looked into, now that I have said that we have put community at the center of this whole discussion, are the Sustainable Development Goals, which we are all aware of. So the SDG 11.4 specifically looks at protection and conservation of cultural and natural heritage, but we are also aware of the many discussions that are happening around where culture is being considered as having a transversal role for all the Sustainable Development Goals, because it has a role to play in contribution to the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals. Because without the cultural context of a particular place or space, the development is not possible. So we are placing the case study in this context. So talking a little bit about Art for Life, it started 20 years back, and the organization and the intervention has worked across 60,000 folk artists and more than 40 intangible cultural heritage forms across India. And the main strategy that it has, which has also evolved over a period of time, are first safeguarding art, the actual art form, the intangible cultural heritage form. Second is empowering artists. So without artists, again, how will the living heritage continue? And the larger heritage in terms of a cultural landscape will continue, which is home to the communities where they are staying. So empowering artists to take charge of their own development, and then looking at villages as units of development, because we have cohesive communities. So branding villages or developing villages as spaces of conservation, continuance, and vitality. So rebranding villages as cultural hubs. So this has been the methodology, and it has the initiative has had several monitoring and assessment on a regular basis internally and externally. So there is enough evidence to build the case with us. So coming to the case study, which is on Purulia, which is a district in the westernmost part of West Bengal. Purulia has been a part of the larger landscape called Jungle Mahal, which many of us are aware of. It has been known by different names. But if we look at the landscape of Jungle Mahal, it includes the current districts of Bankura, Purulia, West Midnapur, and Jhargram. And the landscape, both natural and cultural, are very similar. And the history actually dates back to 8th century BC. And also there are remnants of Jainism in this particular district and in these areas. It's a beautiful landscape with lots of built heritage, temples, archaeological sites strewn across the place. It is home to one of the biggest section of indigenous communities in the country. And it has had its own history, including the fact that, this is an area where Tassar silk used to be woven, and that Tassar silk was actually part of transcontinental trade in the medieval period as well. So just to sort of make the point that it has a very rich cultural history. So looking at Purulia specifically, it has temples, palaces, natural heritage, dance, art, craft, festivals, language, ethnicity. Santals are the main group, but there are many other communities like Birhors, Oraos, Mundas, Kheria Shabor, etc., many others. So just to tag a little bit of the heritage assets that are there, apart from the natural heritage, mountains, rivers, forests, it also has many historical sites, as I said, remnants of Jainism, then the Brahmanical influence that came in. It has 10 state-protected sites. It has a beautiful palace, which again dates back to rulers ruling Purulia for 800 years. And there are many built heritage sites across. It is a land of festivals and rituals which happen around these spaces and places. Lots of indigenous festivals which are for offering prayers to cattle, to their harvest, even for the newlyweds couples and sons and daughters, families, etc. The art and craft is also extremely rich in this area. Starting from the music and dance forms, which are integral to the lifestyle of the people in Purulia. In fact, they have a saying which says that when we speak, we sing, and when we walk, we dance. So it is so integral in their life. And there are many dance forms, and we know now that Chau dance is the most famous one. But they have many other indigenous dance forms which were not documented at some point of time and that were not known. And one I would like to mention is Natua. I don't know how many of you have heard, but Natua is the ancient dance form of this region, and it is believed to be the dance form from where Chau originated. So it is a very important dance form of the place. There are the Jhumur singers, dancers, and there are the crafts of Santhal Patachitra, which is different from Midnapur Patachitra, and Sabai craft, and different kinds of handworks that happen in the communities. So I'll come to some of the interventions which make the case for us. So Chau dance, I would say when 20 years back when we went to work in Purulia, there was abject poverty. It was one of the poorest districts. And there was no hope really. People worked as wage laborers. The women there actually were bidi binders. Bidi is tobacco. And there was huge health issues. So it was in a very bad condition. From there, we journeyed through our methodology to come to a place where today there are 5,000 active Chau dancers who are performing locally, nationally, internationally. The number of Jhumur singers and dancers have increased substantially. And a very important part have been preservation of their skills, incorporating the Guru Shishya Parampara so that the masters come in to actually teach and transmit the skills to the young generation, which was not happening earlier, and continue the practice. The inscription on the representative list of Intangible Cultural Heritage of Humanity in UNESCO, that has helped significantly in creating value and recognition of this dance form. For the built heritage also, what I was saying when we went there, the communities did not really attach any value or any kind of recognition to that, and they were in a completely dilapidated state. So another interesting example that I would like to give is there's Shiv Mandir called Lahariya Shiv Mandir. This is quite famous, and you will find YouTube videos also in this place. But what you will not find is the Chau dance integrally linked to this temple structure, because when the Chau dance season starts, the Chau dancers actually start their season by performing here first. All Chau dancers of the entire district gather here to offer prayers, they perform show, and then they distribute to the different villages to actually perform their shows. So it's as significant as that, but that is not documented or promoted. Another interesting story is about Chau mask. They were non-entities. They were a sub-industry of the Chau dancers. But today they have their own artist identity. They have artisan cards. There are from 10-20 people, there are 370 artists there. They have a folk heritage, a community museum. They do their annual festivals. And Chorida the place is called Chorida. It has a GI tag today. So it is one of the most vibrant tourism hubs actually for any kind of tourist to go to Purulia. They do not miss Chorida, which did not exist on the map 15-20 years back. Coming to handicraft, I'll just give one example for lack of time. So I will like to speak about Shabai, where the women who did beadi binding, we had first taught them to do rope making with Shabai. Shabai is abundantly available in the local biodiversity. And then from there, they learned the craft. It has been a long journey. And today there are 500 women who are earning their livelihood to the extent that they can actually support their families, send their children to school, go to the market to buy things of their choice. And there's a very high happiness factor there, which is the earning may not seem a lot in our consideration, but there is a very high happiness factor in terms of the economic and the social recognition that they have got. Similar things have happened with Santhal Potachitru. And one of the major things that have happened through the process is that the local government has taken a note of these places and the development. So the local government, the private sector has come forward to invest in these places for cultural tourism, for development of district infrastructure, because those were contributing to the process. And finally, cultural tourism has really brought all these aspects together. 20 years back, even 10 years back, Purulia was known for insurgency, conflict. Nobody went. Today, it is a hub of festivals and tourists. And what has happened is the living heritage has got integrated with the heritage spaces that are there. I would just like to recall a very small experience that in 2006 or 7, when we first started a community, now the community festivals are owned and managed by the community, but when we first started, it was in the Cheliyama temple, and there was one Jain family who visited. So we were very surprised to see there were young people mostly, but a Jain, very senior community family visited. And they were completely vegetarian, and they were there, and it was not comfortable also for them. It was very not a comfortable space for those kinds of people to be. So we asked that, why are you here? Just for the holy festival? What is your... So they said, no, in our in our community and in our library, we have read about these temples, but we have never known how to go there, where they are. And so when we heard that your holy festival is happening around this temple, we made it a point to actually visit. So there was no awareness also which changed dynamically. So just to conclude that we have seen that a unified approach to conservation and sustainability in terms of actually bringing in community at the center through community empowerment and building ownership and identity of the community whose home that place is, has made it a significant step to actually change the social, economic, and cultural environment of the place. And the cultural sense of cultural rights increase, and through that, the sustainability becomes easier. So with that, I will finish. Thank you.
Next, we have Nimisha and Dr. Neeti Trivedi.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Neeti Trivedi, and as you see, my co-author is Nimisha. She is again an ex-student, and we have been working together. So this presentation is a part of a 4-phase project that we are right now working on, and the work that we are presenting here is the first phase of the project. So a little bit about myself. I'm Dr. Neeti Trivedi. I'm currently working in MIT Art, Design and Technology University in Pune. And my background is I'm an architect and urban planner. So when we started looking at this project, we started it from that perspective. We were working on a brownfield project, and that is when we came across that there were certain heritage structures which, as per the guidelines, were heritage, but they were considered as brownfield. And that is when we took a different turn towards our project and we started working on this. And I have been working a lot on collaborative planning, participatory governance, and community participation. And that is when we started bringing in that the structure is right in the center of the center of a community that has been there from a very, very long time, a dense community. And how is this structure considered as a brownfield area? So this is when we started working on it. And as I said, my perspective is not. I'm not a background of a heritage and conservation person, so please excuse me if I go anywhere wrong. Yes. So when we started working on this project, as I said, we were looking at a very different. We were looking at it from a very different point of view. But this presentation that I'm talking about today is it explores the potential of community engagement in revitalizing India's historical forts and mills. So we had to limit our scope, and we started looking at only forts and mills, and not focusing on, because it was a beginning. So we had to limit our work to a certain extent. That transforms them into thriving spaces for modern life while preserving their cultural significance. So I'll just go back a little bit and discuss where did we start this from. So in December, I hope you all are aware that in December 2023, our Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi, inaugurated the first Indian Art, Architecture and Design Biennale that was held at a historic World Heritage Site of the Red Fort in New Delhi. A significant feat organized by the Ministry of Culture of the Government of India as part of the Ayadhi Ka Amrit Mahotsav celebrations. This landmark event was marked as a pivotal moment in India's cultural and architectural landscape. Addressing the huge gathering of professionals, academicians, students, and general public, the Prime Minister highlighted the historical significance of the Red Fort's courtyards, which have witnessed the passage of generations before and after India's independence. He emphasized the role of art, culture, and architecture as symbols of national pride that provide a glimpse of the rich architectural heritage of India. He praised the works displayed at the Biennale's exhibition at the Red Fort and described it as an amalgamation of color, creativity, culture, and community connection. Under G20 presidency, you must have come across these slogans as Vikas Bhi, Virasat Bhi. You must have come across Save Heritage, Save Future by ASI. So what does these slogans represent, and why are we promoting through these slogans? Maybe because we are, as the Biennale the intent of the Biennale was to engage youth, to bring awareness. These slogans also help us in reaching the root of it. They represented a transformative approach integrating technological innovation with traditional practices. This synergy aims to invigorate the heritage conservation ecosystem while fostering youth awareness and engagement. The slogans also underscored the interconnections between sustainability, development, and heritage preservation, emphasizing the dual necessity of safeguarding cultural assets while advancing urban and infrastructural growth. So we also came across these couple of challenges and impacts on heritage that was happening. And we also realized that while we were looking at several documents, we came across that while the government had the opportunity to work on 100 Smart Cities mission, they were only focusing on the industrial corridors and have proposed 10 industrial corridors that aimed at transforming rural areas into cultural hubs, when we already have so many heritage structures that can be converted into them, and urban centers as well. This is when we also realized that these heritage structures were under complete neglect. So as I said, we were limiting our scope. We started looking at forts and mills. We are aware that forts and mills are our historical heritage sites, hold immense cultural and historical significance with origins traceable to ancient times. I'm sorry. Yes. The forts that we have are imposing structures constructed by powerful empires, served purposes far beyond their primary function of territorial defense. However, with the advent of modern warfare, technological advancements, and changes in governance, the strategic importance of forts diminished over time, leading many to fail into despair and ruin. Similarly, there were mills that represented a different facet of heritage, industrial heritage, that is, emerging during the British colonial era in India. During this period, the mills that we had were left after the textile production changed, the machinery changed, and that is when multiple industries closed down, employment changed. I'm sorry, I don't know why these slides are changing. Yeah, sorry, maybe because of me, sorry. So this is when things started improving. And we looked into when we started looking at mills, we realized that there are a couple of mills that have been changed. And we also looked at Jadavgarh Fort in Maharashtra. That is the only fort in Maharashtra that has been readapted. So we looked into readaptive use that has been ongoing at several places. Looking at that, we went into and realized what is the definition of adaptive reuse and how it is being done. So readaptive reuse, to the definition, if I have to look into it, is to reuse a building or structure for the purpose of giving it new life through a new function. But during this literature review and these theories that we were looking into, in 1894, Eugene Emanuel has also come up with a definition for readaptive reuse, wherein he mentioned that the best way to preserve a building is to find a use for it and then to satisfy so well the needs dictated by the community, to be very specific. So when we looked at these readaptive reuse and looking at them from the community's point of view, we understood that community involvement has to be explored as an important key factor for adaptation and for long-term sustainability of such projects. The methodology that we are looking at right now is where we are looking at mixed research methods, where we have collected data through literature review, of course, but we also started conducting several informal interviews and started talking to a couple of academicians and researchers that are working into conservation and heritage. A lot of snowball sampling method was involved here. If I look at the community participation and readaptive reuse, what we did was involving local stakeholders and community, and that had ensured that the readapted structures reflect the needs and aspirations of the community, fostering a sense of identity and continuity with the city's heritage. This, we realize that people's relationship to the heritage is the same as the relationship of a child to its mother. As mentioned in the book, My Legacy, Reflections on Culture and Identity. I'll directly go to the cases that we were looking into. I will only discuss two cases because these are considered as one of the best cases where community participation has been involved. So this is the first example, Rajwada Palace in Indore. This is an important case because in 2017, when the Smart City mission was undergoing, the palace was placed as a was given a focal point for Indore's cultural heritage, and the entire Smart City mission and was revolved around the revitalization of the palace. During this process, I'll just give a brief on how the community was involved. The community, through a proper review of interviews, the community got involved through citizen forums and included prominent locals, market associations and resident welfare groups. Similarly, a similar effort was noticed during Mehrangarh Fort, Jodhpur, where Mehrangarh Museum Trust was involved and involved the community for the skills. Through their skills, the community was involved and a lot of local economy got a boost out of it. Then there are a couple of examples of Phoenix Mills, but where private stakeholders were involved, it was realized through the research that the project was semi-successful and not completely successful. We have reached a stage where we have realized what are the downfalls of of community participation. First, there are the regulations and bylaws are still, I would say, underdeveloped. Secondly, finances are not up to the mark because a project like this involves a lot of finances, wherein Smart City Mission, in my opinion, could be the first step, and it was an opportunity that we missed. Third step, of course, social aspects and the community has to be given importance in this case, because they are the ones who are holding it together. It is an identity, and they take ownership towards it. So it is the first step where the skills can be involved, a capacity building can be undertaken. Yes, I would like to end here because I'm out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. I would now like to request both the chairs and the authors to please come forward, and then we can start the discussion. So please take your seats at the table.
Community, you know. I'm just worried about what do you mean by community and what community. How has it informed us? For example, the first one, technical, you know, it's a very technical thing, fine, identified quite easily. The last one, more difficult, you know, it's
I would like to request the chairs to initiate the discussions, and we can take questions. I think we can also take questions for Professor Menon now on his keynote address. So if anybody has those questions, they can also ask. So please, sir and ma'am.
I'll just start off by saying that it's an important focus. Community is an important focus. We've seen several kinds of communities here being discussed. One from a very erudite, well-informed community of scholars, and the other very diverse society at large. The last one was very diverse society at large. So what kind of society are we talking about, and how do we engage with them? One would be easy because scholars, you deal with them in a scholarly way. But the larger community, how do you deal with the larger community? And in between all the others, I think the word community has been rather loosely identified here. And we want to know how those communities were identified and how they would benefit. So I think that's one thing that struck me, that all of them have made, I would say, very commendable efforts to relate community to heritage conservation. That point is being made. But that leaves the question open, how do we really understand this community and how do they benefit? Each one of them in a different ways have identified the benefits, but it struck me that it's something that we can be discussing. Since we have got all the authors here, they can be discussing what do they mean by the community and how the community has benefited by their intervention.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what Professor Menon is saying. In fact, that was one of my points also, that, you know, when we talking of stakeholders and community, who exactly constitutes the community? I know we've talked about the local artisans and craftspeople and, involvement, but very often we need to consider, is it just a tick mark, the community involvement tag, and the stakeholder, much abused word, or is it actually taken into consideration when we are thinking of management of these kind of landscapes, cultural landscapes? So I think some of you have tried to cover that, and before we go any further, if there are any questions, I think we can take those.
Am I audible? Okay. Yeah. Okay, so two questions. One for Professor Menon.
I do not come from a background of either heritage or culture. So when you talked about the Venice Charter, about which I know very little, for laymen or laywomen like me, I think having a charter gives a starting point. And I think that goes a long way in making it accessible to those who may not be at the same level of understanding as the rest of the audience here is. I'm not here to argue because I really am not from the background, but this is something that I felt that for a beginner, maybe a charter is a good starting point. My second question is to Dr. Trivedi. And it's not a question really, it's a comment that, when we look at smart cities, essentially they're defined by technology. At least that's what in India we talk about. And I wanted to, get the thought of this panel out here. That, when we make everything so well structured, do we then leave space open for culture to grow? So when you put a fort in Indore, okay, it's landscaped and you have tours and you are so-called involving the local community, but where is the dynamism left? Because everything around is solidified. It becomes almost like a static culture, and that kind of, I think, takes away from the very definition of culture. So, thank you.
How do you want? No, I think mine's sort of a foundational question, takes a long time to answer. Except to say that, yes, charters are important, but the issue I was raising is what charter? Like if I choose a model saying that the charter has to, the example I was giving that you could be 6 feet and blonde and all, that's a good charter? Now, do we have to follow it? Is that beneficial? So one has to then begin to question what are the values that the charter espouses. And this, we had 4 examples of communities that say, well, this is what we value. Do the charters begin to codify those values and say that, look, those values must be enhanced? Because they're rooted, these all 4 studies are rooted in certain geographies, certain cultures. So should charters emerge from those roots? Or should they come from the air somewhere, like colonialism came and modernized us and said, okay, now we've got to be modern. So today, so many years later, we say, well, what kind of modernity? What do we mean? Do we have to give up the past to be modern? Those kind of questions arise. So your point is well taken, charters are important, but the other question, equally important, was what are the charters we are talking about? So I think the rest should be answered by the others, because, would your studies lead to charters? I can imagine where you got some expert point of view, like Dr. Arun was talking about the expert, very quite much easier. And you don't even need the charters because it's already there. Those documents are there, those literatures there. So what charters are we talking about? It's there, and there they're applying it. And they're using it in a way quite contrary to what the Western charters are saying, because it's rooted in a certain thing. They allow change, they allow difference, they allow reconstruction. Whereas the other charters say, no, authentic means not allow change, not to allow. So I'm saying here we got 4 examples where they can answer the question better. Would you like to attempt it?
Yeah, I have a direct question. Can I answer that, sir?
Yeah.
Hello, thank you for the question. I completely get that's the perspective that all of us are missing on. Smart City Mission was an opportunity to involve all these aspects. It was not anywhere mentioned that we should or we have to exclude heritage or cultural aspects to it. So that is why I mentioned that it was an opportunity for local governments, and they have missed that opportunity. The best part was Indore was able to look into it, and all their ideas, the report that they submitted as a proposal to the government when they got selected as one of the 100 cities, they had put in the palace as a focal point, and everything revolved around it. So all the progress, all the developmental aspects that they had put in the report, in the proposal, it was as per the palace. So it was an opportunity, and I think Indore has taken a very good stand on it. And as you said, we link smart cities mission to technology. That's not the case. So I think that as a I would say layman, even I'm one of them because I'm still looking into it. We have to look into these matters, because then we rely too much on the governance aspect. That is where participatory governance should come into picture, and that is when we as community needs to get involved, because I think in the morning someone mentioned that we are the government, and I think that's how it should be taken into consideration. I don't know if I've answered your question. Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to clarify one more thing that is sort of being discussed but not focused on. And that is that when community is involved, we're talking about the future. Everyone is talking about the betterment of the community. And if you link it to conservation, how are we dealing with conservation? Are we talking about conservation that are to change to make the community better? Or we're talking about conservation as something that is of the past, must be preserved for the benefit of the community? How will that benefit? So I think that it raises an important foundational question that we are not really discussing in detail. And if I might put it in a much more provocative way, what we are really trying to say is that conservation as India is about the future, not the past. It is rooted in the past, of course, but the act of conservation, the purposes of conservation, the objectives of conservation is to create a better future. And if that be so, what happens to all the knowledge that we have imbibed on what conservation is about, what heritage is about, and what it's all about? Heritage is always evolving, as some people have mentioned, it's always evolving. And I think you point out that, a very interesting point, that heritage, you don't have to look at it locally. You can see from internationally how it has been constructed. So there are many ways. I think these 4 papers have brought out important points. But the question that you raises this issue, that does it require us to relook at the way we are practicing conservation? Is conservation about not the past, but modernity? Are we trying to say that we must be a different kind of a modern nation through conservation? So if that be so, then conservation is a very dynamic, progressive, changing idea, but rooted in the past. And there again, I would quote the philosopher Paul Ricoeur, who said that to be modern, do we have to forget the past? Because today, the way we are practicing modernity, for example, what we have done to Vishwanath Dham and all that, is the fact that, to be modern Banaras, we have to destroy the past and make it a modern thing. But yes, the temple will be preserved, because that is the essence of it. So yes, we have conserved heritage. But have we conserved heritage? So where, these are the kind of questions I wish all of us would be able to talk about. And thank you for the question, because I think it raises an important issue that all of you can begin to think about. Because all of you in your own ways have answered it, but not been able to put it in a provocative way. In a very apologetic way, you say, yes, it is this also, that, and that also. But I think we need to be much more provocative, much more aggressive, that in India, in Purulia, in Beypore, in Indore, in Tamil Nadu, this is the kind of heritage we have, and this is the kind of heritage we want as to practice. So it has to be put in a much more provocative way, instead of, I think all 4 speakers were rather apologetic about the fact that they're different, but it's important, but please understand us, we are different.
And also one more point, if I may briefly just add to that, is that when you're talking about conservation and how we look at it, and look at it and bridge the modern with it, then and if you're talking of it as renewal and repair, then where the community involvement is like, where are they involved in the decision-making process on what is to be conserved? And then conserving, and then their involvement becomes that much more relevant, that what is of value and what is culturally valuable, religious value, etc., and how is it to be then, their involvement to occur in the future as well, going into the future. So that is one.
So, yeah, I don't know if we came across as being apologetic, but in the context of the sacred spaces that we were working in the two temples, at least the first temple, Abhatsahayashwara temple in Tukkachi, is a very interesting case where, of course, in the presentation we talked only about the Ayadhi Ganitham, which was what we wanted to focus on. But that project is amazing because it's a 11th century temple, and that 11th century temple about 60 to 70 years ago fell into disrepair, and this village, it's called Tukkachi, and the temple actually is a Shiva temple, but there is a Durga shrine, and in colloquial Tamil, Tukkachi is actually Durga Achi, which means Durga's rule. So the village from this 11th century is actually carrying the name of the deity in the temple. And then with about 60 to 70 years of deterioration, the community, the villagers, had a severe disconnect with the temple. They would, and why? Because 60 to 70 years is still the life expectancy of Indians. So you didn't have a new generation of people who have seen this temple as a vibrant, it's one of the earliest Cholas who created this, and it's a remarkable temple. The current generation, not the current generation, generations of people have only seen this temple as a ruin. So the temple was always an eyesore. And development started around the temple. People were selling plots, and the village was changing. Its characteristic was changing completely. The disconnect was very clear. So when we talk of what should be our charter, or what we really need in terms of our culture moving forward, is relevance and continuity. I don't think the way the Venice Charter is conceived is for relevance and continuity. I don't think relevance and continuity is there. It's a piece that you must go and see in a museum, or it's an archaeological aspect that you must respect, but it's not about how relevant it is to me in my life. That relevance and continuity is not spoken of in these charters. And therefore, if you're really talking of the importance in the community, it's important to revisit how we should deal with these sites. So in fact, what happened in that project when we finished submitting the DPR is that many things came together at the right time. You need a donor for this scale of work, and it came together. The government was there. It was taken up, and in a matter of 2 years, the entire site, with 2 different sthapatis working, the entire site was revitalized. And the photograph that you saw, that the first photograph, which is of several people in the temple premises, on the day of the reconsecration, there was no space to stand. And the whole community has sort of, taken ownership of the space again, because in the 2 years of conservation work, it was hands from the village that were employed to do the renovation work. So this was a very important connect. The sthapatis came from distant places, but they chose to employ local youth, which really created a connect. So we need to reconstruct, we will reconstruct. But we need to reconstruct because we need to create that continuity and relevance for the community. There are several cases, and Dr. Shika knows of another temple which has an incomplete Rajagopuram. And now, if you were to look at it, there'll be hue and cry if that Rajagopuram has to be completed. But then that is being completed now in public eye, because we are not really worried what the Venice Charter says, because in this place, continuity and relevance is so important to the current generation. And if you are able to establish that, I think we are doing justice to what the original people who wanted to establish such places did it with. So, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. the question regarding communities, we often say that plurality, and often in my study also I found there are plurality of community, and they are heterodox in the sense of what they are looking from a heritage, right? It's not always the same. For example, this thing always came to my mind. For example, you are revitalizing that the uru making. For example, the community of Ashari, the carpenters. End of the day, what we are doing, we are reinforcing the caste system, for example, right? Because the ender move, for example, you must be familiar with the Gandhi Ambedkar debate. Gandhi said that Chadurvarna is important because it gives the division of labor. Ambedkar said the problem, you cannot come out of the division of labor, right? That's a problem with that. So often some of these things may reinforce that kind of a traditional hierarchy where you are always doing menial labor. And or for example, I was talking about this ender space of uru making is a masculine space. There is no female in that space. You always take care of your Khalasi and I will cook at home, right? By revitalizing that, what is happening at the gender question? Or for example, I was talking about the businessman, the traders, who will actually in this enterprise, who is getting benefit out of in terms of class, right? The coolies and people are not getting now, mostly the Bengali laborers are doing that and they will get a minimum wage, right? In this renovation, who is actually getting benefit out of it? So I think that heterodoxy and the contradictions and the predicaments of seeing community also important in our kind of discourses. That's what I'm just.
So, addressing the question of community, because our center of work has been on intangible cultural heritage, and one key feature or characteristic that we have in our country that I also find that I always have to introduce that when I present internationally is that we have culturally cohesive communities. They are rural communities mostly. They are so there will be a village or a cluster of villages where these communities stay and they practice a particular intangible cultural heritage form traditionally, mostly as a cultural occupation. So traditionally, livelihood has been linked to that, and they have been part of the process through generations for a long time. And we've been working, for example, I'll take the case of Purulia because that's our case study, that when we first started 20 years back, the process has evolved because when we first started, we went to find the conditions so hapless, so bad. And that is the time that we realized that the traditional skills, the creative skills or the cultural skills that are there with the community, which are not in practice anymore, or the younger generations are not coming forward, are extremely valuable skills to recreate the livelihood if they are contemporized. And if a certain ecosystem is created for them to facilitate that process of skill transmission, of innovation, of development, and that has been the process. And along with that, even trainings on entrepreneurship, or even trainings on digital things, and all those things have happened over the years. Now, when we first started, it was safeguarding the art and creating livelihood. But then it moved forward to international cultural exchanges, because we realized that if artists from different parts of the world come together to actually exchange ideas and creative notions, then the growth that happens is massive. The confidence that's created is massive. And from there, we moved to the aspect where we found that people were just hopping into the villages just to see an art village or a dance village or where they stay or how they live or what their customs are, which are integrally linked. So that is when the whole village tourism thing started, which was community led. And then eventually we realized that, the interpretations of heritage or the interpretations of their dance forms or how they see it are based a lot on oral traditions and how the communities interpret heritage. So what is the way that we can put that forward vis-a-vis the more elite sort of narrative? So that is when a community museum was built, where the communities also became a direct part of actually designing that museum, which is inside the village on the community's land. It's a partnership, public-private community partnership. So these kinds of things have happened, and eventually, if we also look at the progress, Chau was essentially, for example, a male dance. But there were some Chau female artists who are very well known, but it was not in practice. Nobody expected it to be in practice in the community. But when they started developing, women came forward, and then there was huge hue and cry as to why women would dance Chau. But there are now 70 women dancers in the community, and just a few days back, there's one Chau artist who won the Bismillah Khan Award. There are several who have won Sangeet Natak Academy Award and things like that. So the recognition that got created with the community have impacted the overall development and the conservation of both the intangible cultural heritage and the cultural space. So they own the festivals, they own the whole process of conservation maintenance, and the whole thing started from what do you think is valuable to you. I am not coming and telling, oh, Chau is very important, please conserve that. So it was about sort of evolving the whole process with the direct participation and leadership of the community. So I would say that is an important area which has led to these kinds of indicators, some of the indicators that I talked about. But what we really look at is the overall development, and I think the dialogue is, I mean, we have sort of established, I'll just say your second question from the more development perspective, we have probably established in the Mondia cult or after that culture has a transversal role, but we have no way still of measuring how culture is contributing to development indicators in different fields. They still remain disconnected, and they are still sort of working in silos. How do we integrate that to make culture a tool for sustainable development in the real sense in terms of indicators? Because we are all measuring those, we all know what those are, but those dialogues remain with us and within these kinds of cohort where we are already informed, we are already talking about culture. How do we mainstream that dialogue with indicators of measurement would be my one sort of take for way forward. Thank you.
Dr. Trivedi, would you like to?
Yeah, can I please just add I would like to say that what Madhura was just talking about the measuring tool, I'll just add to the discussion that we are ongoing. The second phase of the project that we are taking up, and we went up and did couple of interviews where we came across that people are not getting involved, because I was working in the region of metro cities. So what we came across was our people, our society is turning more towards a service sector and not towards the skill development sector or our primary occupation that was earlier. So what has happened is, even though a family is contributing to the skills, they have the skills, the ancestors have been working on it, the grandfather has been working on it, but the younger generation are moving towards the service sector. And that is where the skill is getting diminished, it's getting vanished, and then it comes down to the wages aspect. Because when we were looking into this, we also reached Hyderabad and we were looking at the tombs. So there are the tombs are getting, I would say, I don't know heritage-wise what's the term, but they were, cleaning it up and, restoring it. So all the masons that they were working there were from Rajasthan. For them, it becomes very difficult, and then that leads to, the wages are not sufficient enough. My family is in Rajasthan, and then the work has been going in from many, many years. That is what we were told. So from my current interviews that we are working on in the phase 2 of the ongoing project, we have realized that this is our part 2 that we are working on, where policy makers need to be checked upon, and maybe we need to relook into what we are, maybe the discussion will go away from community that I'm currently working on. And as you said, about the measuring tool. So even I'm not aware of the measuring tool yet. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bring in a mixed method approach where through their interviews, also bringing in various aspects from economics as well, where well-being, quality of life, everyday living has been measured. And looking at those indexes, I'm trying to develop how to measure the culture part of it. So I don't know if I'll be successful. Maybe we'll meet next time and discuss on it more. But to the younger generation that is here, maybe you can start working on it, because this is really, really important. And I think this is what, as Sir said, heritage and conservation is our future. So we have to leave that behind for our coming generation. So yeah, that's one bit from me. Thank you. Yes, please.
Yeah, I think it's one question there.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, okay. Gurmeet.
Okay. Couple of questions. One is wonderful presentations, and what I'd like to, you talk about 20 years and 30 years. I guess several of us are kind of riding the wave. The language, what is in the speaking when we are looking at the space of culture? For instance, Arun's presentation and using the terminology decoding Ayadhi, Ganitham in Dravidian temples. Now, again, one wants to know what it is. And you can understand that this whole decoding, reverse engineering that he talks about, is actually very much embedded using the terminologies, the vocabulary, the lexicon of the community. I'm a fan of the work Madhura and Ananya do. But then what comes to my mind is, of course, culture from their project is that cultural heritage, the working in cultural heritage space definitely requires to be linked with social justice. And I guess that's what you are trying to imply, that we have to walk across, if you're talking about the future, if you're talking about cultural heritage, when you're talking about the homogeneous community, the areas I work in, I don't see them homogeneous. And if you're uncomfortable about speaking of caste, class, and all of that, we are in a bubble where, community looks dancing around the fire and all looks good. But you're really touching upon some very, very serious issues if you really want to make it relevant for the people who, where it really matters. The other is about the tragedy of the commons. Now, you did speak about linking cultural heritage practices with cultural heritage spaces. And I remember when we were working on the cultural heritage policy for Punjab, we looked at intangible separate of tangible. And I wonder if we were to speak with a lot of Punjabis or Bengalis and say, look, what do you understand by intangible and tangible? Do they even, in their vocabulary, in their imagination, can even separate the two? But we as professionals are actually looking at it as two different areas of work. And I remember we were not looking at what you were doing, and probably you were not looking at what we were doing. So there is this whole tragedy of the commons, because we were not looking at each other, and we work in a space where tools of governance is that properties are either privately owned or government owned. There's nothing in between. I remember a conversation with an SDM who said, "Ji, ye mandir jo hai, ye to ya to private hai, belongs to the Thakur, or it belongs to the government. You can't say ye community temple hai." So whatever falls in the space of commons, there is nothing. The solutions of separating tangible and intangible and all of that, and the patronage of the state actually are all tools of disruptions. They are not tools of integration. And that's what, if you have a response, I'd be happy to hear that. But language, to my mind, is a very, very important thing. The other day I was having a conversation with a mason on the phone, and he's trying to explain to me how he's building the arch and how the load is getting transferred. And I'm trying to explain in my vocabulary, and I couldn't understand him, and he couldn't understand me.
So one thing I want to clarify is, when I say homogeneous communities, I mean in terms of their cultural tradition of ICH, the cultural occupations that they have had traditionally, which is homogeneous mostly in our country. If you see in Punjab embroidery, there will be a whole community who have been practicing that for generations. What I mean by homogeneity is that in terms of the cultural occupation. Just wanted to clarify that. Yeah, and I think our policy work happened in 2012-13, so we've come a little forward.
There was one before that, I think. Yeah. I think two more.
Okay. Yeah, this is for Professor Menon. I mean, about the charter specifically, because you raised very important points, and I am sort of an optimist, so I think we shouldn't undermine the INTACH Charter. I think it has contributed a lot in these years. I myself have used it in a lot of, while doing conservation plans, I refer to the charter. Whenever I've taught in SP and all, we look at all the charters now, So in the series of Venice, Athens, Nara document, Bara Charter, and then INTACH has its place, the INTACH Charter. So I think it has contributed a lot, and all the presentations that were given today sort of link, to the principles that have been mentioned in the charter. You raised a very important point about its application, and I think that is where we are sort of losing it, because I don't know whether INTACH itself has evaluated how the charter has been applied, whether any of the INTACH project reports mention the charter and its application, which is where, why we see Venice being talked about, because it has an application at the UNESCO World Heritage level. So, and in case of India, we do documents, we make them and then we forget that it also has an application. So probably that's where it is a possibility, and if you would like to comment on that. And just for the one clarification I wanted to make on the smart cities. Yes. The smart cities overall heritage projects, it's more than 1,000 crore that has been spent. So it's not just one city like Indore. There have been city level, applications like in Jaipur or Gwalior, which was more than 230 crores. In fact, much more than what Hriday has spent. But the problem there was that smart city did not have a structure for heritage like Hriday had. So probably that's where the lack was. But in terms of expenditure, it's much more.
Yeah, I just discussed one case study, so I have covered that. Thank you, ma'am. I didn't discuss it here, but I have covered.
One.
Thank you. I'll try and make it as brief as possible. Comment from Dr. Arun Menon when he said that heritage and cultural relevance has to be seen from the point, conservation especially, has to be seen from the point of view of relevance and continuity. That should be also a primary effort for conservation of heritage and culture. And I'm trying to link it to what Madhura said, that working in the cultural sphere vis-a-vis developmental sector, we still don't have relevant indicators. But you mentioned that, the happiness levels and quotients in that community have risen. That area has developed in terms of, picked up in terms of rural tourism. Obviously, there are economic benefits to be derived along with relevance and continuity of an almost dying performing art and crafts. So do you think the need here is also to revisit the indicators? Probably the results that you get from a successful project and initiative continued, are they not feeders into those indicators? And aren't those indicators which you talk of, I'm not aware of what they are, probably they are also, composed in a very academic, uber sanitized spaces with a little disconnect from what actually is at the grassroots level. So to flip the situation, you get what I mean?
Can I answer
Thank
that?
you.
Can I answer that?
Yes.
So I think the indicators that I'm talking about today, we have taken about 10-15 years to sort of establish them, not because we did not understand that, but we were looking for that language and the vocabulary by which we will be able to get people to listen to and understand what we are talking about in terms of socioeconomic empowerment, in terms of, I mean, culture leads to a a village with full sanitation. If I make this sentence, then it is not possible to understand that. What I'm trying to say is, what you made is a very valid point. Those indicators are there, but those indicators are development indicators, and they are not being linked to how culture is instrumental in bringing out that development. We are doing that, and we have had to raise funds from, say, 2005 till about maybe 2 years ago also. And then every time we have to negotiate what we mean by development, because, oh, you work in culture, and it's festivals and it's exchanges and it's things like that. So there's a long way to go for us to actually mainstream the dialogue. That's what I meant. Right now, there are dialogues on culture and climate change, and there are no indicators to measure that. So,
may I just respond to that discussion that just happened? Okay, the indicators are, if you take the context of Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, the indicators are what signatories to the SDGs, which is all the countries and therefore the governments, have to fulfill at every stage, have to document, quantify, document, and submit at every stage. Now, if you just pick up SDGs 9 and 11, the indicators are very well thought out. And the indicators, every target of every SDG has an indicator. So if you're talking of, let's say, carbon footprint reduction, you'll have to actually measure what's the carbon footprint reduction coming from cement consumption, for example. Okay, is cement consumption reducing? Then the carbon footprint is reducing. Now that is linked back to don't pull down buildings and reconstruct them. Try to revitalize existing infrastructure as much as you can. But here, if a property is culturally relevant, there is an importance more than just the physical entity being retained. There's a cultural importance. And so specific SDGs actually talk of how these dots, you can join the dots and you have an indicator. So you can actually cut down carbon dioxide emission by wanting to preserve some buildings, retaining infrastructure and revitalizing infrastructure instead of pulling it down and going with a completely new building which will eat up more carbon dioxide than retaining it. So these indicators are very well thought out. And if we look at these indicators, especially SDG 9 and SDG 11, they are completely in the domain of culture. So it's important for us professionals to know this connect so that we are able to understand the relevance in the context of sustainable development. But it's the government authorities that will actually have to do this number crunching and then demonstrate that whether SDG 9 how much of it has been achieved in Tamil Nadu, in a district in Tamil Nadu, or a district in Punjab or whatever. So this is, I think it's very important for us as professionals to understand these things and then contextualize them in terms of the projects that we're working on. It has a great meaning.
I'm